While the world fixates on who won the 12-day Iran-Israel war, there's one critical factor 99% of people are completely missing. This wasn't a war at all. It was the most sophisticated global economic and geopolitical restructuring operation disguised as military conflict. The conventional narrative paints June 2025's brief but intense exchange of strikes as another Middle Eastern flare-up that fortunately ended quickly. But when we flip the lens and analyze from outcome back to origin, a far more disturbing picture emerges. This wasn't about nuclear programs or regional dominance. It was about engineering the perfect conditions for the next phase of global power consolidation. The 12-day theater. Why this exact timeline? Every seasoned strategist knows that in real warfare, conflicts either escalate beyond control or drag on for months. 12 days is neither random nor natural. It's surgical precision. This duration was just long enough to trigger specific market mechanisms while short enough to prevent genuine regional conflagration. The timing reveals the first layer of orchestration. June 2025 positioned this conflict at the intersection of multiple critical deadlines. The Q2 earnings season for defense contractors, the summer energy demand peak, and most crucially, just 6 months into Trump's second presidency, when his administration still enjoyed maximum political capital for bold moves. But here's what no one dares to acknowledge. All three primary actors, Israel, Iran, and the United States, achieved exactly what they needed from this controlled escalation. Israel demonstrated military superiority without the burden of occupation. Iran suffered humiliating defeat while actually preserving its core nuclear capabilities and gaining international sympathy. The United States flexed military muscle while avoiding the quagmire trap that destroyed previous administrations. This level of coordination doesn't happen by accident. It happens when invisible architects orchestrate outcomes that serve interests far beyond the immediate participants. The silent winners follow the money, not the missiles. While analysts debate tactical victories, the real beneficiaries were quietly positioning themselves for unprecedented windfalls. The defense industrial complex didn't just profit from weapon sales. They secured the geopolitical justification for the next decade of military spending increases worldwide. Consider the numbers behind the narrative. Israeli precision-guided munitions, American bunker busters, Iranian missile responses, and defensive systems all require immediate replenishment. But the deeper game involves the companies that manufacture the rare earth elements, semiconductors, and advanced materials essential for next-generation weapons systems. Here's the perspective most miss entirely. China. While everyone watched explosions in the Middle East, Beijing quietly locked in long-term resource contracts with African nations, knowing that Western attention would be diverted. The 12-day conflict created the perfect smokescreen for China to advance its belt and road infrastructure projects in regions that normally receive intense Western scrutiny. Russia emerged as another silent winner, not through direct involvement but through market dynamics. Oil prices surged during the conflict, providing Moscow with desperately needed revenue for its Ukraine operations. More strategically, the brief Middle Eastern crisis demonstrated to global markets that energy security requires diversified suppliers. Exactly the argument Russia has been making to justify its continued relevance despite sanctions. But the most sophisticated winner was the financial sector itself. Currency traders, commodities speculators, and defense industry investors didn't just profit from the conflict. They helped engineer its optimal timing and duration to maximize market volatility windows. The nuclear theater. Destruction that wasn't the media celebrated Israel's strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities as decisive blows against Tehran's atomic ambitions. But when we examine the technical details with reverse thinking, a different picture emerges. Iran's nuclear program wasn't destroyed. It was strategically downsized and relocated. The attacks on Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan created impressive visual destruction while leaving Iran's most critical nuclear knowledge and personnel intact. This wasn't military failure, it was the perfect outcome for all parties. Iran gets to rebuild with more advanced, harder to detect infrastructure. Israel gets to claim victory while ensuring the Iranian nuclear issue remains active, justifying continued military budgets and regional influence. The United States gets to demonstrate decisive action while avoiding the complications of actually eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities entirely. What no one mentions is the missing enriched uranium, approximately 400 kilograms, that Iran cannot account for post-strike. This material didn't vanish. It was relocated before the attacks began. The implications are staggering. Iran may have used the conflict as cover to distribute its nuclear materials to safer, more dispersed locations. This scattered nuclear infrastructure model makes Iran's program simultaneously more vulnerable to limited strikes and more resilient to comprehensive elimination. Exactly the strategic ambiguity that keeps the region in perpetual tension while preventing actual nuclear war. The proxy collapse, reorganization, not elimination. Traditional analysis celebrates the collapse of Iran's proxy network during the 12-day war. Hamas remained silent, Hezbollah fired no rockets, and the Houthis managed only token resistance. But this apparent collapse masks a far more sophisticated restructuring operation. Iran's regional influence wasn't destroyed. It was reorganized into less visible but more resilient networks. The old model of large identifiable proxy armies was becoming increasingly expensive and vulnerable to precision strikes. The 12-day conflict provided the perfect opportunity to dismantle these obsolete structures and transition to more distributed, technologically sophisticated influence operations. The new Iranian model focuses on cyber capabilities, economic infiltration, and political influence rather than military proxies. This shift makes Iran's regional presence harder to detect and impossible to eliminate through conventional military action. Western intelligence agencies are only beginning to understand that they celebrated the destruction of Iran's most visible assets while its most dangerous capabilities were quietly evolving. This transformation serves American interests as well. The old proxy model created clear targets for military action. The new Iranian approach will require sustained intelligence and economic countermeasures, exactly the type of long-term engagement that justifies permanent American presence in the region. The energy market orchestration oil price movements during the 12-day conflict reveal the most sophisticated aspect of this entire operation. Prices surged exactly enough to justify renewed investment in American shale production and European renewable energy programs, but not enough to trigger recession fears that could derail these long-term energy transition plans. This precise calibration doesn't happen naturally in chaotic markets. It requires coordination between major producers, financial institutions, and government policymakers. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other Gulf states used the conflict to rebalance their relationships with both Washington and Tehran, positioning themselves as indispensable stabilizers rather than choosing definitive sides. The real energy story wasn't about supply disruption. It was about market psychology resets. The brief crisis reminded global markets that Middle Eastern oil remains irreplaceable while providing political cover for massive public investments in alternative energy infrastructure. European governments could justify emergency energy spending. American politicians could promote domestic drilling, and Asian economies could accelerate nuclear power programs. What few realize is that this energy market volatility was precisely timed to coincide with annual budget planning cycles across major economies. The June conflict occurred exactly when governments needed justification for increased energy security spending in their 2026 fiscal plans. The Trump Doctrine, controlled disruption. Trump's role as ceasefire broker wasn't diplomatic success. It was strategic theater designed to establish a new doctrine of profitable peacemaking. The speed of the ceasefire negotiations reveals pre-existing agreements rather than reactive diplomacy. Trump's administration needed to demonstrate decisive foreign policy success without triggering the anti-war backlash that destroyed previous Republican presidencies. The 12-day conflict provided the perfect opportunity. Military action dramatic enough to showcase American power, brief enough to avoid casualties that generate domestic opposition, and successful enough to justify increased defense spending. But the deeper game involves Trump's relationship with business interests that profit from controlled instability. The former real estate developer understands that crisis creates opportunity, but only when the crisis can be managed and resolved on favorable terms. The Iran-Israel conflict wasn't about preventing war. It was about demonstrating that American leadership can engineer profitable conflicts that end precisely when intended. This model establishes a new paradigm for international relations. Conflicts as business opportunities rather than policy failures. Future tensions will likely follow this template. Intense but brief, dramatic but controlled, profitable for all stakeholders while appearing to serve traditional geopolitical objectives. The regional realignment. Chess moves for 2030 while everyone focuses on immediate aftermath. The 12-day conflict engineered regional relationships that will define Middle Eastern dynamics for the next decade. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE didn't just support different sides. They tested new alliance structures that transcend traditional sectarian and ideological divisions. The conflict demonstrated that regional powers can coordinate responses to mutual threats without formal treaties or public declarations. This flexibility allows Middle Eastern nations to balance relationships with all major powers, America, China, Russia, and Europe, without being locked into exclusive partnerships that limit future options. Iran's apparent isolation following the conflict masks its successful transition to a more sustainable regional strategy. Tehran learned that direct confrontation with Israel attracts overwhelming American response, but that limited conflicts can actually strengthen Iran's position by demonstrating resilience while avoiding complete destruction. Israel's military success came with significant diplomatic costs that most analyses ignore. European support for Israeli actions was lukewarm. Asian nations remained neutral, and even traditional allies expressed concern about escalation risks. Israel's tactical victory may have accelerated its long-term strategic isolation from emerging global power centers. The technology transfer hidden in plain sight, the most sophisticated aspect of the entire 12-day operation, involved technology transfers that occurred under cover of combat operations. Advanced weapons systems intelligence capabilities and defensive technologies were tested, demonstrated, and quietly shared between allies in ways that would be impossible during peacetime. American bunker buster bombs didn't just destroy Iranian facilities. They demonstrated capabilities to potential customers worldwide. Israeli precision strike technologies weren't just used against Iran. They were showcased for export markets. Iranian missile systems didn't just retaliate. They revealed capabilities that will influence regional military procurement for years. This weapons demonstration occurred simultaneously with cyber operations that remain completely hidden from public view. All three nations, Israel, Iran, and the United States, used the conflict to test next-generation cyber warfare capabilities against real targets without triggering the international legal complications that would arise from peacetime cyber attacks. The technology transfers extended beyond military systems to include intelligence sharing protocols, communication encryption methods, and targeting algorithms that will shape future conflicts worldwide. Arms dealers, technology companies, and military contractors gained invaluable real-world testing data worth billions in future contracts. The coming escalation. What 2026 holds historical patterns suggest that controlled conflicts like the 12-day war typically precede larger, more sustained confrontations within 18 to 24 months. The current victory declarations from all sides mask the fundamental issues that remain unresolved and will inevitably resurface. Iran's nuclear program, while damaged, retains enough capability to reach weapons-grade enrichment within months if Tehran chooses to abandon international agreements entirely. Israel's demonstrated ability to strike Iranian facilities ensures that any renewed nuclear progress will trigger immediate military response. American involvement guarantees that future Middle Eastern conflicts will involve superpower confrontation. The economic disruptions caused by the 12-day conflict, oil price volatility, defense spending increases, energy security concerns, created market conditions that make future conflicts more likely rather than less. Nations that profited from brief instability have incentives to engineer similar crises when economic or political conditions require distraction from domestic problems. Most critically, the success of the controlled conflict model encourages other regional powers to attempt similar strategies. Taiwan-China tensions, India-Pakistan disputes, and Eastern European conflicts may all adopt the 12-day war template. Intense but brief confrontations designed to achieve specific objectives while avoiding escalation beyond manageable limits. The reality behind the information smokescreen when we flip the lens completely. The 12-day Iran-Israel war reveals itself as the opening act of a new form of international relations where conflicts serve economic and political functions rather than traditional military objectives. The real architects of this confrontation weren't generals or politicians. They were financial analysts, market strategists, and corporate planners who understood that controlled instability generates more profit than either peace or total war. The world didn't witness a near-miss catastrophe that fortunately ended quickly. It observed a precisely engineered market manipulation operation disguised as geopolitical crisis. Every aspect, timing, duration, targets, responses, and resolution, was optimized for maximum economic benefit to parties that never appeared on any battlefield. If this analysis proves correct, we'll witness similar conflicts whenever market conditions require volatility injection. Political leaders need distraction from domestic failures, or corporate interests require justification for increased spending on security. Energy or technology systems, the complete picture only outsiders can see is that warfare itself has evolved into a form of international business, where victory isn't measured in territory conquered or enemies defeated, but in market positions improved and profit margins expanded. The 12-day war wasn't the last conflict of the old paradigm. It was the first successful test of the new one.